Give me just a minute or two to set the stage, and then we are going to dive into 10 examples that will help me prove today's point. I know that I've made many videos before on the moral inconsistencies of the God of the Bible. I've made many videos showing the mutually exclusive claims that are found within this canon. I have quite literally, over the course of many episodes, covered hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of biblical contradictions. And when I do all of this, it is under an internal critique, which can be a difficult thing to understand for Christians, at least according to the comments that I get, because they will always say, well, if you don't believe in this God, what standard are you holding him to? His own. This is a way that we can falsify this God concept. If God is always claimed to be X, or said that he would never command X, or that X is always wrong, and then we see a description of God doing something, commanding something, or being something that is in direct opposition to that, we have only a few choices to choose from. We can say that the Bible is inaccurate, that it's not to be trusted. We can say, okay, we trust the Bible, but then that gives us an untrustworthy God. Or option 3, and what I think makes the most sense, it falsifies the concept. It describes a God that quite literally cannot exist because he is so contrary to the nature that is presented about him within the same source material. So that whole point is not necessarily new, but the way that I'm going to try to convey it today is. Here's where I think I've gone wrong in the past. I've given too many examples, 20, 30, 40, 200, 300. Literally, I've done those. And I jump all over the Bible. And yes, even though I stay in context, Christians get overwhelmed or they find one that maybe kind of has an out and they stick to that and ignore the rest. What I want to do today is I want to give you 10, a small, simple number. And I'm going to give you all 10 from the Torah. That way we don't have to have arguments about, well, the new covenant changed this versus the old covenant did this, or, well, you don't understand. Yes, both of the things you're talking about happened in the Old Testament, but one happened during the law and one happened during the prophets. These are, really different things going on, or one happened in a book of poetry and one happened in a book of history. No, listen, all just from the Torah, the law. And to be extra safe, we're not even going to touch Genesis because Genesis, at least to some Christians, can read very allegorical. So between Exodus and Deuteronomy, which are the 4 books giving a narrative of God's early working with his people, where he is the most vocal, where he is showing up physically, where he is the one giving the commands, or oftentimes fulfilling them himself, where traditional Christian authorship would give all of these books to the pen of Moses, so one author, though that's definitely not true. Here, I'm going to show you 10 contradictions, 10 moral inconsistencies. We're going to cover slavery and murder and theft, innocent life and equality, collective punishment, immutability, anger, and the Sabbath and purity laws. Within these 10 subjects, I'm going to give you 2 verses each from those 4 books within the Torah to lay out as flatly and clearly as I can the contradictions. Now, I'm not saying there is not an answer for some of these, but what I'm going to encourage you today, if you're listening to this video at all with any intellectual honesty, is does that answer really fix it? Or are you just happy that there is some apologetic answer so you don't have to actually contend with the issue that's being brought up? If you think you have an answer for one, does that mean you have an answer for all 10? And if there is even one of these that is a legitimate issue that is truly showing a moral inconsistency in the perfect objective law of Yahweh, does that not defeat the entire concept of his perfection or his moral nature? So again, I know we kind of set that up, but I wanted to be as precise as possible. But let's go ahead and dive into these 10 examples. And by the way, believe it or not, and we can do a part 2 so I can show you, I actually pick some that I know have very common apologetic answers because of that challenge I put forward to you. And I'm going to show you what that apologetic answer is, and then show you why I think it doesn't stick. And I'm going to be very curious to hear everyone's replies. I want to start with a verse that maybe you could consider taken out of context, but it's typically done so by the Christian who is using it as a defense when I bring up how God has special rules for his chosen people, but not for the nations around them. Whether I'm making the point that that doesn't allow for objective morality, it's quite literally subjective if it's from tribe to tribe and situation to situation and era to era. But then the Christian will quote Exodus 12:49 that talks about the same law applies applies to the native born and to the foreigner residing among you. Now, in context, this verse is actually talking about circumcision. If you wanted the rights to perform Passover, then all the males in your household must be circumcised. So we're told again that the law is for everyone. And yes, that is how Christians use it in defense. So then what is your answer to this very simple verse in Deuteronomy 15:3? You may require payment from a foreigner, but you must cancel any debt your fellow Israelite owes you. This is one of like 50 examples where God clearly gives different rules for how to treat foreigners or those living amongst you or your neighboring nations or anything like that. I mean, there are iterations of each one. So I don't want to be difficult. I want to leave you all of the choices on the table. Choice one is you can admit that that first verse actually has nothing to do with saying that God is fair in all of his laws to all people and that it's context specific about circumcision and Passover ritual. Now, if you do that, you're going to lose a lot of the defense for when I talk about the problems with the fact that there is subjective morality happening based off time, place, and people group. But at least you'll be a bit more biblically consistent and you won't have to call this a contradiction. Or you can hold to the verse as how it is typically used as a defense against what I say and what other critics have said, in which case I've just shown you a very valid contradiction that you have no excuse for. Even the fact that if you use that verse in context about circumcision, we are hearing God's voice himself tell that everyone must be circumcised when they participate in this faith. That would then be a direct contradiction against what Paul tells us in the New Testament. And you might try to use some new covenant rules to get yourself out of there, but I just want you to look at how hard you're working to try to reconcile as you try to still convince the rest of us that your God has one perfect law that is unchanging because he himself is an immutable character. Surely I cannot be the only one seeing this plethora of problems. Hopefully that's all making sense. Let's do another. Let's go with Deuteronomy 24:16. Parents are not to be put to death for their children, nor children for their parents. Each will die for their own sin. Now, what if I read you Exodus 25? You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the third and the fourth generation of those who reject me. So in verse 1, parents aren't supposed to be punished for their children, and children are not supposed to be punished for their parents. And yet in the verse that I just read to you, God himself says, and this is, by the way, like the third time that he says it, that he will indeed punish children, even many generations on, for the sins of their parents. Now, I'm not going to be this detailed on all of them, but I want to show you something here. The clever Christian might say, Brandon, wait a second, read that verse more carefully in Deuteronomy. Parents are not to be put to death for their children, nor children for their parents. It's about death, not punishment. Except here's the problem. The follow-up on what is happening to those children is that they are being put to death many times. I know I wanted to keep it in the Torah, but the most obvious example is when God has David's son put to death for David's sin. But if you want to stay in the Torah, I could give you Exodus 12:29. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt. Now, not all of the firstborn were children, but every firstborn is still the child of someone else. And many of those firstborn children are little kids. And did they not die? Were they not put to death for the sin of their parents? We know that Pharaoh lost his son. Was that not a child being put to death for the sin of its parent? Even though, no, it really wasn't. It was for the sin of God, because God was the one who forced the parent, Pharaoh, by purposely giving him a hardened heart. But still you might say, no, listen, it's going to get tricky here. But the first verse is talking about God not doing that to Israelite peoples. He can punish the Egyptians that way. Well, then again, we go back to the death of David's son. So that excuse doesn't work. Or again, you've just opened up the can of worms that God does not treat all people the same and has specific rules and laws for one people group over another people group, in which case now you have lost objective morality again. Now, I took us through all of that so that you could hear the excuses and see how Christians will try to weasel out of these things. But then we actually have verses that cover everything we need. It is death, not just punishment. It is within the chosen people group, and it still comes from the Torah. This is in Numbers 16:27 through 33. I'll read it quickly. So they got up from around the dwellings of Korah, Dathan, and Abiram. And Dathan and Abiram came out and stood at the entrance of their tents together with their wives, their children, and their little ones. Then Moses said, "This is how you shall know the Lord has sent me. If the Lord creates something new and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up, then you shall know that these men, not their wives, not their children, not their little ones, these men have despised the Lord." This is about the Korah rebellion. This is from the men. They are the ones who did wrong. As soon as he finished speaking, the ground under them was split apart. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up along with their households, everyone who belonged to Korah and all the goods. So they went down alive into Sheol, they and all that belonged to them. The earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. And this isn't the only time. Again, that's all you have to do is actually continue to read your Bibles, and you will see many times that God kills the innocent children for the sin of the father, even within the chosen people group, even within the same Torah, even with the same tactic, death, not just punishment. What is your excuse? Okay, but we're going to speed things up. But do you see what I'm going for here? So what I'm not going to do is play this bounce around game for every single one of them. And I bet the excuses that you'll hear in the comment section will not be about this one that I just covered. And it'll be about one of these other ones where I don't take the time to show the full thing. I just wish you guys could have my vantage seat for a day and see the excuses and the criticisms that come in that are so selective in what I share and how I share it. But the things that are left alone when I take the time to just lay it bare, because they are without excuse. So let's get to these 10 commandments for an example. Exodus 20:15 says, "Thou shalt not steal." Pretty simple, right? And yet, Exodus 12:35 through 36. Now listen carefully. The Israelites asked the Egyptians for silver. This is immediately where it's going to get dismissed, but stay with me. Asked the Egyptians for silver, gold, and clothing. The Lord made the Egyptians favorably disposed, so they plundered the Egyptians. Now here's the Hebrew word for plundered. It is the same military term that is used when fully taking things from people that they conquer that don't belong to them. Theft. Also, God causing a mind-altering, interrupting in free will, another contradiction from what Christians claim about the character of their God, to make the Egyptians respond to this question does not make it not stealing. It makes it coercion by God using his magical powers to, again, get these Egyptians to do something they wouldn't otherwise do. Just to bring it into the real world, not that this exactly works either, but if you had like a hypnotist who hypnotized someone into saying yes when I ask you for your possessions, they have currently changed the state of this person's mind to make them agreeable to something that in any other state they would not be agreeable to. And then the hypnotist asked the person, "Can I have all your money and can you sign over your bank account to me?" If this happened and it went to trial, I think there'd be a pretty good case to be made that that hypnotist actually stole the money from that individual. And if that's the case, then you would need to apply that same standard to this God. And if you're unwilling to, again, ask yourself why. If you think it's okay that God changes people's hearts and minds left and right just so that his chosen people can get a leg up, ask yourself how you justify that with the concept of objective morality or the supposed Christian doctrine of free will, which is the only excuse, even though it completely fails, for the problem of evil. Every verse just unloads issue after issue after issue. Here's one I see no answer for whatsoever, so I can't wait to hear the Christians tell me about it. Exodus 3:7 through 10 is a scene where God is describing how awful the slavery in Egypt of his Hebrew people have been. The misery, that it is not a good thing, that he is going to rescue them. Moses is sent to deliver his people from oppression. So in one scene in the Torah, we have a God and a Moses who can recognize the oppression and misery of this kind of slavery. And then you know what verse I'm going to read? Leviticus 25:44 through 46, where God tells Moses, "You may buy slaves from the nations around you. They will become your property. You can bequeath them to your children as inherited possession for life." You might try to give me a kidnapping law. Doesn't matter. You're legally allowed to buy these people. It's not kidnapping. You might try to tell me it's indentured servitude. You would be wrong. You're simply reading a different verse in Exodus about, again, how the Israelites are to treat Israelite slaves. But this is specifically for the nations and the neighbors around you. This is the definition of chattel slavery, like what we see in the transatlantic slave trade. I don't understand how anybody says it's not. You are purchasing slaves from a different nation that is not your own. You are owning them as what? Specifically laid out here, property. For how long? Forever. Can you pass them down as property, as inheritance? You may. Are there any rights given to them? No. What you hear about how to treat a slave is, again, your Israelite slave. Were these slaves beaten? Yes. Were they raped? Yes. Were they worked to death? You betcha. Were their children born into slavery? Absolutely. So a God and a commander and leader that recognize that it's not good, that it's harmful, that it's oppression, that it's misery in one verse, and then specifically condone it in another. You let me know how these work. Let me give you a softball though, since that one was so hard. Exodus 20:13 says, "You shall not murder." It does not say, "Thou shalt not kill." Many people just say it lazily. No, it is specifically about murder, and by definition, murder would be unjust killing. God is fine with killing as long as it is justified. Like I said, I'm giving you a softball here because your answer for any time that God seemingly kills someone who doesn't deserve it is you can say, well, God is the arbiter, and if he decides that they should die, then it's not murder, it's just killing, because all killing by God is justified. And if that's the case, we have two issues. One, I would remind you that God himself said he's not going to kill the children for the sins of the parent, and yet he does. That seems to be unjustified. That to me then would be murder, which would be another example and contradiction of this. And I think that solves it. But I'm going to go ahead and give you the softball that you want by talking about one of the many genocides, like in Numbers 31:17 through 18, where God commands Moses to kill every male among the little ones. These are little boys, and every woman who has slept with a man, but keep the young girls for yourselves. So they've already killed all the soldiers. Wouldn't that be the enemy combatants? Wouldn't that be the definition of kill, not murder? You want to make excuses about defending their homeland or anything like that, which are still problematic considering these people are on the move into sovereign nations and God is giving them the destruction power to take what isn't theirs, which sure seems a lot like murder and theft. But if you don't want to go that far, what about for the little boys? What about for the 15-year-old girl that just got married in that tribe? She's not a virgin, so she's useless to these people now. No one wants to take her as their captive wife, so they kill her. They kill the old men. They kill the old senile women who don't even know where they are. They kill the wives of the soldiers they already killed. They line up all those little boys and put them to death because the army was kind of soft and they didn't do it right away, and Moses gets pissed. I might be conflating it with another account. There's so many accounts of little boy murders, and that's what they are. In any other context, we would all know that after the war is over, to line up the children and keep the young virgin girls and kill all the baby boys is murder and rape. We know that. So I want you to think about how hard you're trying to justify what this God is commanding, especially again in contrast to his supposed precious command not to murder. And I'm going to double down. We're going to count this as another one because I just want you to really think about this. Aside from the commandment not to murder, we get verses like this, Exodus 23:7, do not put an innocent or honest person to death. I mean, right here, God is claiming that there are innocent people. Now, again, just be honest for a half a second. Who is someone you think of that is innocent? Just right off the top of your head. Who do we call innocents when we talk about wartime and collateral damage? Women and children. It's like a universal understanding. I'm not saying everyone plays by those rules, but come on, we know what innocent means. And yet we get more commands of genocide. I'll leave Exodus and we'll go to Deuteronomy in case you're wanting to make some weird excuses about which book it's coming from. In 20:16 through 17, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them. The Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, on and on. Completely. All members. You cannot have a God that supposedly cares about not murdering and not killing innocent or honest people, and in the same law books command ethnic cleansing, genocide, murder of little boys, rape and hostage of little girls. And if you want to know how you can know you're being dishonest here, if I was reading you the same kind of stuff which does exist from the Quran, you would not hesitate to talk about how sick and twisted and incorrect and immoral Allah is for those commands. But then all of a sudden, the blinders come on, the bias come on, you put on the God glasses and you listen to the apologist, you turn off your brain, you say the same stupid excuse over and over and over without thinking because you don't want to think about this. You don't want to have to come to terms with the fact that your God is no different, quite literally the same Abrahamic God with the same par for the course in time moral character that is anything but objective, that is anything but good, that is anything that you would allow today or that you would wish upon your family, or a rule or law that you would wish to be under. Just knock it off. I think we have 4 more. This was honestly in my head like a 15-minute video. I'm so sorry, but you know what? I am finding the need to explain it because I'm just so tired of seeing the same excuses. So let's move on to this one, which is going to be about the immutability of God. In Numbers 23:19, we hear that God is not human, that he should change his mind. Many other verses that talk about the immutability or the perfect consistency of this God. But here we hear that God is not like us. He does not change his mind. And yet in Exodus 32:14, here we get to see God change his mind. God says he's going to consume all of them and just use Moses to make a great nation. Here's what Moses said. But Moses implored the Lord, his God, and said, "O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and a mighty hand? Turn from your fierce wrath. Change your mind." Moses tells God, change your mind and do not bring disaster on your people. Want to guess what the next verse says? And the Lord changed his mind about the disaster that he planned to bring on his people. Checkmate. What are we talking about here? And by the way, just in case someone wants to argue, actually it says relent. Yeah, in some translations. Do you know what the word relented means? Let up. To change in the courser action of behavior. You playing with the semantics here is honestly embarrassing because of the plethora of other biblical examples. Whenever a Christian pokes the tiniest hole in like the verbiage of a verse that I give just quickly offhand and acting like they've completely defeated the entire point, it only shows me, since they didn't bring up the other 32 verses that fit and have an account for them, that they don't care about the truth and or that they do not know their Bible. Because unless you can give an account or wordplay for every single verse that shows the contradiction, you still have nothing. Here's an entire video about God being able to be haggled and negotiated with, where he quite literally changes his mind many times. Here's a video about God breaking his promises and deals, which again would be a version of changing his mind. But you only need to go there if you're going to be silly enough to argue the semantics of the words in play here, instead of recognizing that, you know what, no, we do have a God that changes his mind. That's obvious. And yet we have a verse that says he won't. That's a problem. Let me be consistent here. Let me be honest here. Nope. And so then go watch those videos. But in the NRSV, it's change your mind. And that's a good translation. God planned to do something. Moses said, please don't. God didn't. This is a definition of changing one's mind. And yet still, I guarantee I'm going to have people in the comments making this very same excuse. The next one I'm going to do is about God's supposed compassionate and grace and slow to anger. So it's Exodus 34:6-7, where God proclaims, the Lord, compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love. Compassionate, gracious, slow to anger. Against Exodus 32:9-10, literally 2 chapters before, here's a description of God. So this is before Moses is descending the mountain. God says this, now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them and that I may destroy them. God's first impulse is genocide of his own people. That is not compassionate, nor is it gracious, nor is it slow to anger. The last two, again, here are some snowballs, a little refresher, since the last few have been absolutely bulletproof. And I like both of these, but I know what you're going to say. The first one is I just want to get past like some of the words sometimes and think about the accounts at large. Like, do you know why God instituted a Sabbath? We know that God rested on the 7th day, but do you know the verse about why it is good for man? You can read it in Exodus 23:12. On the 7th day, rest so that your servants and animals may be refreshed. It is a command actually for productivity. It is a command for life-giving, to be refreshed, refueled, present, capable. It's actually one of the better things going on, except for the punishment that doesn't fit the crime, which is death, which we get an example of in Numbers 15:32-36. The people aren't even sure if they're supposed to go through with this because it seems so insane for them to actually put someone to death because he picked up sticks on the Sabbath. But they consult. They go to Moses. Moses goes to God, and God is clear. You must put him to death. The Lord commands Moses. Moses has the whole assembly, every single person goes out and stones this man to death. Now, I'll give you the consistency here. God says, don't do this. Someone does it, and they're put to death. Now, we can talk about if that's moral or not, but this episode has been about moral consistency. And what I want to point out is when you have a law that is there to supposedly protect life, to give it rest, maybe the punishment shouldn't be death. Like, am I the only one who just doesn't understand how that would compute? How can the moral of renewal become the justification for killing, destroying what that law was supposedly there to preserve? And the funny thing is, like, I know that this is my weakest of the other 8 that I've shared so far, only because Christians will so desperately want there to be a loophole, when in reality, we can all just know it is not right to kill someone for working, picking up sticks on one of the days of the week. Like, you already having to say, well, hey, different times, God's command, like, what, he can do whatever he wants, is embarrassing and pathetic. Truly, when you yourself work on the Sabbath, don't you? But all day you will defend this God for this action. It boggles the mind. And let me just give you the last one. And again, I'm almost bringing you ones that I know have these built-in excuses because I want you to hear how ridiculous you have to work for them. Here's the last one. In Leviticus 18:12, we have, do not have sexual relations with your father's sister. This is a law. Who's the lawgiver here besides God, by the way? Moses. Keep that in mind. Let me read you where Moses comes from. Exodus 6:20. Amram married his father's sister, Jochebed, who bore him Aaron and Moses. Moses's parents' marriage is the exact relationship. Later, there's where you're going to have fun playing with this. Outlawed by the lawgiver himself, Moses, whose very existence wouldn't be if this had actually been something upheld. Now, Brandon, the law came after the act. New laws get passed all the time. What, should we go back and lock everyone up? No, but do you know why new laws are passed? Because we find out information, or we see where the old ones were not good or valid or useful any longer. It's an admittance almost of a mistake, or at least of a state of non-perfection. This video, though, is about the moral inconsistency of a perfect, all-powerful being who supposedly gave a perfect, immutable, and objective law. Well, apparently not. For those of you being willing to be honest, you will see the clear issue here. It's actually the perfect example of a law that obviously evolved and continued to evolve, not just when you get to the New Testament, but even in later parts of the Old Testament, and then again, yes, of course, in the New Testament, and then again, even today. What Christian today defends slavery? Paul in the New Testament did. Post-New Covenant, we're actually seeing a pretty sick return of that. That's a video I definitely need to cover, but it's beside the point. The point here is that within the Bible itself, hell, within the Torah itself, we can see an evolving law that is making up for things it didn't think of before, that is fixing things that it didn't get right the first time, that is definitely harming things and going against the very word of God that we see earlier. It is anything but consistent. It is anything but objective. And worse, it is not even held up by the God of it all himself, which you might say is the one and only person to make these exceptions. But again, the hypocrisy and the insanity of the one who has to go that far to excuse a perfect God in a way that he would never even excuse a flawed human. I will simply never understand. And to bring you empathy, I was a believer. I saw these in part sometimes and dismissed them. Sometimes by using the same excuses that I've told you are unacceptable. Sometimes by listening to an apologist give a quick quip and it made me feel good, and I was willfully blind to the issue because I didn't want to know. Or honestly, because of my great faith, I just assumed that there's something I'm missing. Maybe it was the devil deceiving me. God's ways are higher and mysterious after all. Everything you've ever heard me criticize, I was that Christian, which is why I feel okay criticizing it, because I know that when I was really ready, and for me it took the birth of my son, knowing that I was going to have to teach this to someone else with a level of accountability that apparently was more important than the accountability I was willing to hold myself to. And I needed to have the correct answers ready if this was going to be something I taught and placed upon another soul. And so I dug. I faced it head on. And it so clearly went away from the excuses of the apologist. It so clearly went away from everything I had thought before. And so again, I only give you 10 examples. And I'm curious if you're at the point where you too can really see these for what they are. If you don't want to, you'll find a way not to. If you came here to troll, if you came here to win, if you came here to debate, if you came here to make yourself feel better, you'll find a way. But will it be real? Will it be right? Will it be consistent? Will it be accurate? Will it be truthful? I couldn't do it any longer. So tell me what I'm missing if I'm missing something. Can you really contend with this? And I'm not so much challenging the staunch Christian, but if you're here because you were doubting or because you're in the process of deconstruction, you don't know where it's going to end up, and you've been told all these things by all these apologists and you've read all these books that explain all these horrible verses, what do you say for this? Wow, that was way longer than I thought it was going to be, but I think that this was a pretty good one in terms of covering off on all the usual angles and excuses. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you missed yesterday's Sharing Fire video, go and check that out. Please consider supporting this channel. I'll see you Tuesday with a new reaction video, and until then, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support: my Iconoclast, Ann, Boris, Grant, GVI, Jimmy, Joe, Kitboga, yes, the Kitboga, Matthew, Perry, and Shawn. My Humanist heroes: Chris, Christian, Craig, James, Jared, Christy, and Matthew. My Atheist advocates: At Guitar, Caleb, Dakota, Dan, Drew, Jeff, Jeffrey, Jeremy, Jugs, Julie, Malcolm, Paul, Sparky, and Thomas, as well as all of my secular scholar patrons.